Hello everyone. The title of our session is Welcome to an Unstructured Future. Over the last few years, there's actually a quiet revolution been going on in the growing use of unstructured and open-ended feedback in research. And I would say it's probably the fastest growing part of our business right now, fueled by lots of factors: improvements in text analytics technology, innovation in how we gather unstructured data, and perhaps a realization just about how insightful open-ended feedback in particular can be to a market researcher. Now, this session is really designed to bring you up to speed if you're not already aware of the power of unstructured data, and if you are, to bring you up to speed with some of the latest developments and where we're at as an organisation with using it in our business. And I'm joined today by three colleagues from across Kantar, all experts in their field: David Hughes, Stephanie Pineda, and Peter Usherwood. Now, my interest in this started a few years ago when I'm a research methodologist. I was trying to look at ways of improving how we measured and rated films, because I was getting a bit fed up with the star rating system. I don't know whether you've ever noticed, but we kind of forgot to use the 1 and 2 stars a few years ago, and all the data you get back from rating scales tends to be clustered at the top half of the scale, which is not very useful. And so we did this project to see if we could develop a better rating protocol by asking people to write a short review of a film they've seen and then analysing that en masse. And we built a linguistic scoring system based upon what they said, coding up all the different types of words to levels of sentiment. Now, obviously this type of technique is kind of 10 a penny now. But what we found was it was amazingly differentiating in how it could pull apart one film from another far more effectively than a traditional rating scale. What we loved about open-ended feedback was that it gave us so much more than just a bit of sentiment. We could deconstruct the individual words that people were using to describe the films and classify them in different ways. For example, pulling apart words that perhaps are emotive or maybe cognitive. We could classify, are they talking about the humour or the storyline? Are they talking about the direction and so on? And we could build these little classification groups, what is now known today as taxonomies of different topics. And that enabled us to really see past just this is a good example, 2 films that are almost identical rating scores. The reason why people like it is completely different, these 2 films. One, the feedback was almost entirely emotional, and the other film, so much more rational in the things that people were saying. And what we went on to build is a sort of a full-scale diagnostic tool for film reviews that enabled us to really understand and analyse films for their content. For example, Iron Man stood out actually for its acting skills. Life of Pi, as you imagine, stands out for its visual appeal, if you've seen that film. Ted succeeds as a film because it combines a level of tension and humour in a really interesting way. And this is all gathered an understanding simply by asking people to explain why they liked a film. Really, I fell in love with open-ended feedback, and we started to play around using it in more traditional surveys, particularly in brand trackers, where anyone who's done a brand tracker realised how constraining they are, especially when you're trying to understand why people say why do you buy your brand of shampoo? This is the sorts of reasons that are presented to people in a traditional brand tracker. When you compare that to an open-ended question, you literally ask people, why do you buy your brand of shampoo? You get this wonderfully broad spectrum of reasons. And what we find is that the things that people say spontaneous appear to be so much more accurate and truthful. Let's compare the two. When you ask people in a prompted way, did you buy that brand of shampoo? Do you think that brand's modern? 40% of people say yes, but only about 2% of people, that's actually a reason to buy shampoo. Value for money is so much more of a dominating factor. And I also pick out environmentally friendliness. If you ask people up front, do you buy that shampoo because it's environmentally friendly? 14% of people will say yes. When you analyse what people say, only about 3% of people talk about anything to do with the environment or eco or anything to do with something on a socially concerning nature, which is, again, perhaps a little bit closer to the truth. And the other thing that we found with open-ended feedback is the level of more efficient differentiation that they deliver. If you ask people why they buy their washing powder, with prompted choices, everyone agrees that their product offers value because that's why they bought that brand, that it cleans well, that it's gentle, the types of things, everything comes homogenized. But with open ends, you actually get to differentiate one brand from another. For example, 29% of people talking about why they bought Persil talked about gentleness, whereas only 3% of people buying Ariel used that as a reason. In my mind, I think one open-ended question can replace about 20 closed questions. And so I've become an evangelical of using open-ended feedback in surveys. One of the most brilliant things you can do if you use it in a continuous basis is track micro trends. These are all, they look like tiny numbers. They're sorts of numbers you would never think about asking questions about in traditional surveys, like 1% of people talking about parabens, for example. But when you expand that out into the actual numbers of people, you can see all 4 of these things are actual trends. And this, I think, is one of the brilliant things you can do, is track trends. But there is an actual physical limit to how many trends, micro trends you can track within the constraints of interviewing, say, 5 or 1,000 people in a survey. And I next want to pass you on to David Hughes, who's going to talk about how we're applying that technique at a massive scale by analysing search and social data to really unlock the trends that are going on in a really incredibly detailed way.
Thank you, John. So we're talking about additional value that unstructured data brings. So I'm going to talk more specifically about the benefits of one such set of unstructured data, that of search. I'm going to speed through this because I'd rather show you rather than tell you. But moving quickly. Search is great because it's timely. We can get almost real-time data, enormous amount of detail in it. Billions of people are searching each day, which is also scale. We have almost population level data within search. The information we get from it is emergent. We're not asking questions, it's emergent from the data. And that's linked to its unprompted nature. So it's what people do. They don't use a filter when they search. Enormous amount of history, which means we can plot trends, we can see how things move around, and it's global. Search is one of the universal mechanisms of navigating the web. So I'm just going to look at 4 of those items, and the way I'm going to do that is take some excerpts from a new way of using search at large scale that we're currently piloting. So we tested this for the cosmetics industry, looking at 2 billion searches over a 5-year period, focusing on the UK in this case, but we could have focused on any country or even come at this from a global point of view. Within it, within that unstructured data, we have defined about 1,000 entities, which we've applied to add structure. So within it, there are about 130 brands, almost 100 ingredients, about 42 issues, plus many thousands of individual search terms, which might provide insight above and beyond that. One quick caveat, I am not in no way an expert in the cosmetics industry. So let's look at how timely the information is we can get from search. Search data is available on an hourly basis if we want it, so it's great for picking up new trends. Here are a few. Emo is making a comeback, at least within the cosmetics area. Say hello to the mid-2000s. Demand for emo looks, and specifically looks like batwing eyeliner, are on the up over the last few months. Octocrylene, I think I pronounced that correctly. Octocrylene is an ingredient in some cosmetics and skincare. It's an organic UV filter used in sunscreens and anti-aging creams. There's been an uptick in interest because it's been discovered to degrade to another chemical which causes cancer. So you can see consumers here looking to see if their products include that ingredient. The next one's not new, but it's quite big. Gua sha is a Chinese traditional therapy involving scraping the skin with jade or rose quartz. In late spring of this year, it's suddenly become enormous. So if you can see, if you were listening at the time as we were, then it's possible to understand consumer trends as they start happening. Search is also great for detail, not just it's growing, but how much it's growing, at particular times, seasonality, looking at the effects of shocks like COVID. So as you can hopefully see from this chart, the winning ingredient of COVID was nicotinamide, which grew over 282% during the period. Other ingredients, this one went from decline to growth during that period, include triglycerides, which links up to a smooth skin trend that we've seen elsewhere. And then in the last 6 months, there's been more movement with things like electrolytes and green tea and kojic acid, which have been growing fast. So inflammation was something that was talked about a lot with COVID. It's also something that consumers have been trying to reduce through the ingredients they find in their cosmetics. So they're trying to reduce inflammation of the skin, redness of the skin, comedemic anti-acne ingredients with things like isotretinoin or tretinol, which is our pick for one of the ingredients that's really starting to take off now. Search is also unprompted and therefore honest. And having seen what people search for, I can tell you that that really is brought home. As we noted previously, COVID has altered the cosmetics industry significantly. One of those areas is that of arrested trends. So aspects which were increasing prior to COVID, but have since plateaued or dropped during. So some examples of that are here. So despite some reports that the pandemic had helped the environment due to reduced travel and consumption, the part that sustainability and eco-friendliness has to play in consumer demand for cosmetics product has flatlined. Similarly, demand for transgender makeup, which was increasing before the pandemic, has also tailed off. Elsewhere, some aspects of cosmetics got a shot in the arm during the pandemic now seem to be waning. Subscription box demand has reduced to pre-pandemic levels. Last slide from me. It's known that cosmetics has declined while skin care is growing. People are moving from covering up their blemishes to dealing with them at source. You can see that on the horizontal axis here. You can also see a big rise in demand for information about skin conditions. You can see that in the vertical axis. We've then plotted countries against that matrix. And while countries are in different places, the direction is the same. More developed, more Western lifestyles are associated with the incidence and understanding of skin conditions, which drives the uptake of skincare over cosmetics. So I hope I've shown with this chart how search can be used to cluster countries, but also track the velocity of that change as consumer attitudes evolve, which can be massively useful information when you are setting strategies for those countries. Lovely. Thanks so much for listening. I am now going to pass back to John.
I think what David's team is doing is fantastic, actually. But what it does is raise loads of questions around why people are buying these things and trying to understand the psychology of some of these decisions. And traditionally, we've used qualitative research to do this type of work, to ask people in-depth questions and try and get people to give more in-depth answers to really understand the psychology of decision making. Next, I want to hand over to Stephanie, who's going to talk about the amazing success we've had in doing qual research at quant scale using chatbots to really, as a technique to really get under the skin of human decision making.
So yes, we have conversational AI to get to know the humans behind the numbers. It provides that human connection, helping us understand the reasons of their purchase or their thinking. So as Haley Langsdorff says, humans are hardwired to tell stories. So why not let people tell their stories? And why don't we listen to them? So what do we mean by stories? Look at this example. You can't expect this type of story from a survey. But we can't possibly get the ingredients, the sources, the occasions. But if we give people the platform to tell us their stories, we get to know that apparently their product consumption is also related to the memories that they want to create with people who are special to them. In this case, the tropical flavors of the seltzer matches the great weather, the outstanding view, which is to make new memories with their uncle. Here's another story which we gathered when we were talking to women in the UK about shampoo. Yes, shampoo. It's a topic that is quite menial, but apparently it's important to women in the early days of lockdown because somehow washing their hair, putting makeup on has helped them feel better about themselves and helped them get through the difficult times of early lockdown. Here's another example, this one on laundry, another category that you wouldn't think people would talk about, but actually there are people who are passionate about this because it means that you're caring for clothes. A study we've done in Brazil where we found this story about a woman sharing that the clothes are special to her because it serves as a connection for her mom, who is no longer here. So it is very important to care for this piece of clothing. So how do we actually get to these stories? We talk to people in a platform that is natural, that is familiar to them. It is fundamentally an exploratory conversation that helps them to be more personal and honest with us. And you can just imagine how much insights and depth of understanding we get from these stories, and we can do that at such a big scale. So how do we do that? We talk to hundreds of consumers, have a dialogue with them, and then we would use a bot to probe on topics that are important, such as trust. And then we would analyze all these responses, leveraging AI to quantify this into themes such as trust, which is quite an abstract topic, but helps us understand how this topic means to individuals now, having a different lens on what trust means nowadays. So when we have these stories that we collect at scale, we help brands to be more authentic. The story I shared with you earlier in the UK, it actually helped a client to articulate their brand positioning in a less broad concept to a more tangible outcome that would resonate with the needs of women today. This would also help clients to embed inclusivity in their strategy, from product portfolio to brand communication. A study we've done for a makeup brand in South Africa has helped the client develop a product portfolio that caters to African women. And we've also helped them shape their brand communication that shows the natural, that elevates the natural beauty of African women. And last but no means the least, we help clients and brands to be more empathetic. So when we've talked to women in India about laundry, we were surprised how many people actually said that they want a detergent that is gentle for the skin when they already have washing machine. But apparently, these women would still do hand washing because they can't remove stains from the washing machine. So it really helps us understand why people are changing or not changing in this case, and helps us to be more empathetic to their needs.
When we first started doing text analytics a few years ago, I remember handing over 10,000 open-ended bits of feedback to my assistant, and he spent 2 weeks trying to code them up. We can do that now in about an hour. And there's just been such amazing advancements in how we analyze text. But I think we're now at a stage where it's not so much the skills at analyzing the text, it's the organizational process of thinking that we're in an organization where we have thousands of people around the world all wanting to analyze text in different types of ways. We're all building up different types of taxonomy. And so we now need to think about how we orchestrate that process in an efficient way. And that's what Peter's now going to talk to you about, where we're going with the process of organizing and utilizing text analytics at scale.
So yeah, I'm going to talk to you briefly about what the future looks like for a company led by these unstructured data products. Unstructured data is powerful. It's the fuel that drives this new wave of products. People have even made the comparison that data is the new oil. An analogy which I think in many ways is apt, although it can lead to one big misconception. You see, with oil, power is concentrated in the ability to extract the raw resource. With data, it's the ability to refine it. And so when we tell you that Kantar has unlocked the power of unstructured data, what we've done is we've perfected this refining process. David and Stephanie have given 2 great examples of this. But we've all seen from various companies over the years similar presentations, and we always have the same immediate questions. Will this work for my brand? Will this work in my market? Is the price point low enough that we can adopt this across the whole business? And unfortunately, in the past, too often these were not simple questions. We didn't get simple answers because they were in fact real barriers. And the reason for that is whilst these other companies and Kantar in the past had perfected the refining process, the processes were not sustainable for the business. They couldn't scale, they couldn't adapt. Therefore, for some years at Kantar, we've embarked on a journey to become a true technology company such that we can produce these insights in a sustainable way. Now, before I go too far and talk about exactly what are the problems that were causing these barriers and what we're doing to solve them, first we've got to talk a little bit about what refining data is. So if we start off with unrefined data, in the context of text data, we all understand what that is. Search data, social data, qual transcripts, chatbots. But then what do we do when we refine it? Well, we actually mix in 2 things. We mix in, best-in-class public domain models for text processing, but also specialized techniques, which is where we impart our specialized market research knowledge. In the case of unstructured data, this can be encoding key attributes in the form of topics to allow us to answer, key questions later on. We refer to this as the human in the loop in data science. And the outputs from this also fall into 2 categories: data assets and feature assets. Data assets are just cleaned up data sets. They're data that we're happy to use for market research. Feature assets are a little bit more abstract. They are things such as machine learning models, classifiers, taxonomy code frames that we've built based on the data. These assets act more like cookie cutters that allow us to reproduce quantitative analysis on top of the qualitative data again and again. And that's the final step. Finally, we apply those feature assets back to the data assets, and this gives us that quantitative information to produce all of the great insights that you've seen in the examples here today. So that all sounds great, but what's the problem? Well, it's actually 2 problems. First off, whilst refining is a key part of the process, because it is so key is because it's specialized. And, the problem with it being specialized, it means even within single organizations, that leads to it being undemocratized. A process developed for one product is often incompatible with another, developed for one market incompatible with another by domain, by data source, so on. It's because it takes time to build new models in new domains. It takes time to train local analysts in how to create data. It takes time to implement complex processes. And so we end up with these islands of disconnected specialists. And then this leads us nicely onto the second issue, which is that often in data science, we treat data like a fossil fuel. I think this is part of the and that part of the analogy that maybe wasn't intended when people said data was the new oil. But it's true, you know, we get it, we use it, we profit from it, and we move on. But the refining process is too expensive to adapt this strategy in the long term. This works for innovative studies in rich markets, but for mass market adoption, you know, you have to increase efficiency over time, not decrease with scale. So we have to recycle the refined resources across all of the different parts of our business. And so what have we done here in Kantar? What are we still doing? Well, we've built what we call an unstructured data ecosystem. This is a system that uses AI to support the refinement and democratize that process out to the entire business. And within that ecosystem, it seamlessly recycles our refined assets. The unstructured data ecosystem gives Kantar as a whole a process which is easy to adopt. It's a unified process for refining unstructured data so that we unsilo ourselves and behave like a true technology company. Now, every domain, market, client, every person in Kantar can refine data based on perfected best-in-class approaches and share assets from around the business. And we also recycle all those expensive assets now correctly indexed, they're easily searchable, distributable, and sent back into the system. This drastically drives down, you know, not only drives down price, but it also increases quality and standardization across the entire business. So within Kantar, as I said, we've started on this journey. Our realization of this unstructured data ecosystem is an internal service called Text AI. Text AI is not a product. It's not something you'd ever interact with directly, but it's an initial attempt at a realization of everything in this deck. And now we have this one platform that serves chatbots so that they can refine in a scalable way and allows them to reutilize their own assets as well as others. In order for all of this to work, we made Text AX, you know, work in many languages, data sources, domains, and it's very easy and reliable for people to find the data assets. This last point is key. We didn't want an ecosystem of iffy data and weak models. We wanted reliable research-grade taxonomies and models that can be used within confidence across our work. You can see some of the examples of how we do this listed on the slide. It's an ongoing journey, but we can always improve, we can always perfect, but we have this unstructured data ecosystem to power all of Kantar's unstructured data products together as a unified business. So what Stephanie showed is supported by and supports the same work from David and vice versa. This is our vision for the future of Kantar. And now I'll pass back to John for some closing remarks.
I can really speak personally to the power of the system that Peter's team built. Yesterday, I asked a question in a survey, what did you eat for dinner last night? And I had 20,000 responses from around the world. And I uploaded it into the Text AI system. I pressed a button, literally pressed a button, and it auto-classified them into all the different food groups. Because someone else, obviously in Kantar, had done sort of a similar thing and built me a almost ready-made taxonomy of what people ate around the world for dinner last night. And, you know, all the different varieties of pasta, for example, classified. And I think that that's a sort of efficiency gain you can have with everyone using the same system. And being able to have technology does a very simple thing efficiently and at scale. So now we've had some very interesting questions. The one that stands out is I'm going to ask this you, Stephanie. How do you actually see the future of surveys with the world of, you know, chatbots and things like social search? Where do you see it going?
Mm-hmm. So as it stands, they have their different use cases, but I think in the future we need to really adapt to everything that's changing now. We can't just keep it stagnant because we don't want ourselves to be to stay as it is, given everything that is changing. So it needs to be smarter, adaptive. Maybe surveys by then won't be linear anymore. That it can also be, to some extent, conversational.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think my focus is thoughts about the survey of future is going to be a lot more unstructured in the actual format of the survey, and I think that, you know, today we think about designing these linear surveys with all the list of questions we want to ask in one line, and I see it being more adaptive and thinking more in terms of the routing, the logic. So I might ask you, why do you buy your brand of shampoo? And and someone says, I like the smell, or someone else might say it's great aroma. They might, anything to do with smell. You then might want to ask a follow-on question like, are there any other brands you like the smell of? And that becomes and so the process of designing a survey is actually thinking about the architecture of the navigation, the sort of developing the themes. Now, you've had quite a bit of experience developing themes.
Yes.
For sort of conversational themes. Can you tell us about that process? How easy is that?
So to some extent, we would use what we know about categories before. Like we know that with shampoo, scent, how it makes you feel after, or maybe nowadays with sustainability, some important themes already. So we would try to we would put that in AI for it to probe about those themes, but replay it or
what does that actually? What do you actually put into the AI system? Do you have a list of phrases or?
Yes. Yeah. So we put seed words and phrases for.
And how do you build a set of? So is it literally you sitting as a team trying to think up things?
Yes. But we do test it before because we know that we are in marketing and it's not necessarily consumer language. So it may not be the words that consumers would actually use. So we would test it first. Okay. So in a way, it is quite a big process if you do it the first time. That's why what Peter shared is really helpful because it gives us more efficiencies, especially because we would do similar studies across categories.
Yeah. I mean, having done quite a lot of sort of text analytics project, I do feel that the very process of building up taxonomies is going to become one of the research skills of the future. I mean, it is quite an iterative process. It requires the same type of analytical processes you go when you're interpreting data. You're looking for themes, and from my experience, you start mapping things out, and then you can push it into the text analytics system. It generates it codes up a certain corpus of your feedback, and then you take what's remaining, and then you look at the patterns. We use a technique called 1, 2, 3 infinity, taken from astrophysics, for quantifying anything that said more than 3 times in 1,000 as being the finite number you have to keep for, say if we're doing a tracking study, 3 comments in 1,000 is the point at which you start to see trends emerge. So 3 in 1,000, that's 0.3 of 1%. That sounds a tiny amount, but when the great thing about unstructured data is you can literally track 100, 200 different sub-themes and ideas, and so by quantifying even the micro little things, you can then see how they move period to period. They might tick up from 3 to 5 to 6, as I explained at the beginning of my presentation, and you then got a trend on your hand.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, yeah. Right. Now, do you think, this is a question that says, is chatbot research actually a bit more like ethnography?
Oh, that's an interesting one. To some extent, it can be. Like with chatbots, it is a mix of qual and quant. It's qual at scale. So ethnography would be really is such an interesting comparison because with ethnography, it's really successful if you see the natural habitat of people without being intrusive. With conversational AI, we try to do that because we want people to really share their honest stories, their thoughts without feeling judged. And we get to analyze the different personas of users as well, understand what makes them tick versus other groups. So to some extent, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think the examples you showed were almost like, the way you were interpreting them, they're almost like ethnography. You're basically looking at someone's spontaneous answers and then interpreting that in an ethnographic way. I think that's a good observation, actually. Quick question, can some of these techniques work on B2B, serving experts, like in this case, oncologists, is a question? Well, I think absolutely. It probably, when you're getting down to 20 to 50 people in a really small survey, it's more like qual. But I'm a massive fan of asking basic open-ended questions to small groups of people. Actually, I'm a fan of asking a menu of open-ended questions and giving people the choice of which ones they want to answer. And it gives them a bit of control and sense of freedom about what they talk to you about. And I found that, there's such an added value to put at the end of a survey, just a collection of really interesting open-ended questions and just seeing what people say, and you can explore all sorts of things in that sort of way, yes.
Yeah. And what our chatbots are like, or like how we would design this, is very different from like bots in service industries like your bank, wherein they would want to terminate the conversation as quick as they can because they've resolved the query. But in our case, we want to like
expand.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly.
So your goal is actually to get them to carry on talking. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the tricks involved in that. What sort of techniques are used for analysing this sort of data? I think I've touched upon that. I think that the technology, there's lots of technology, obviously, for analysing unstructured data. Some of them are getting really smart. The AI elements of the analyze, especially to pull out sub-themes. But I do feel that the basic techniques of being able to look at a corpus of open ends and look for a story in that is actually a skill that you can learn. You can go a long way with basic Excel.
Yes.
But there's a lot of potentially donkey work involved that technology can do the heavy lifting for. And I do see it as an iterative approach, and there's also a shared approach. One of the best things to do is, once you've created a taxonomy, is to spread that taxonomy around to all your colleagues and get everyone to sort of expand upon some of the thinking, because everyone has a different perspective on things. And then once you build these taxonomies, you run them through the system and then see where the gaps are. And then you can slowly move up from maybe having 30, 40, 50, 60% of the comments coded down to virtually, all of them, if you just do it step by step. It's a fun, it's genuinely actually a fun process. And I also encourage a client to do some of the work themselves, because they then get to understand the themes in the data as well. And it's an all-round, and once you've done it, a really well-designed taxonomy can last forever almost. And so that's something that, I would definitely say that if you've never done it, I'd get some experience of doing it. You realise how interesting and fun the whole process is. Yeah. There's a question about how easy it is to do sort of thing at an international scale. Have you got any experience of that?
Yes. We've done studies around the world already. There are some tricky places, or there are things that I think the secret to it is you really have to work with someone local as well, so that you know that the taxonomies would work for that market. There will be efficiencies because you can use different technologies now with translation, but there will still be those nuances, and sometimes those nuances are actually the important ones to capture for these types of studies.
Yes. So basically you create the basic framework and then you get a local language expert to sort of refine the language and so on.
Yes.
Yeah, I found that, Google Translate is amazingly good at doing the basics. And you're then left with about maybe 20% of things that probably need more refined interpretation and development. But yeah. Yes. The question earlier on about the future, I think I probably should mention some of the really interesting things we're doing right now with talking surveys. I think that's in the future, that's going to be one of the really big growth areas. People speaking their answers and analysing, more spontaneous open-ended questions being vocalised. I think that's, with things like Alexa and so on, people are becoming a lot more comfortable with talking. And one of the really interesting things that we're doing right now is working with a team who've developed an actual talking head that looks like an interviewer asking you the questions. And we tested that out on our surveys, and respondents really actually like that, being asked a question by a real, it's a bot, but it actually comes uncannily real. And it's a lot easier for people, I think, to answer a question in a verbal way when they've been asked the question in a verbal way. And I do think that that is going to be really a big growth area in the future. And things like the work of, I don't know if people are aware of the work of Phoebe to sort of analyze the sentiment of what people are saying, I think that's going to be something that's going to be very, very big in the future. I think we're actually out of time. Thank you. If you're interested to learn more about this technique, I'm speaking at an SMR session in November where I've got a team of people who have analysed 20,000 comments made around the world around sort of the secret of happiness, asking questions about what makes people happy. And we're going to do a general session where people are analysing the open-ended data and presenting their findings. So watch out for that if you're interested. Thank you.